DuSable Park, which would commemorate this area's very first permanent resident, Mr. Jean-Baptiste DuSable. He came here around 1779 in order to establish trade with the Native Americans. Now, not very much is known about Mr. DuSable. It is known that he was of French as well as Haitian descent. But besides that, just he was the very first permanent resident of the Chicagoland area, and eventually you'll get a nice riverfront park here behind that. I'd also like to mention this boat slip we're leaving from here today. It's this little L-shaped patch of water. Find ourselves in here. Known as the Ogden Slip, it pays tribute to Chicago's first mayor, Mr. William Butler Ogden. He came here in 1835 to watch over some land that his brother bought in the area. But when he got here, he found himself knee-deep in mold, as well as the place smelled quite a bit. Chicago was nothing more than a swamp. So Mr. Ogden immediately wrote back to his brother, saying that they had been swindled, and he would try to sell off the land as fast as he could. Now, he would sell just a third of that land for about 3 times its original value, so essentially making up for the entire purchase by just selling off the little chunk of that land. I like to think that it was around that time Mr. Ogden might have realized that there's something to this place, and decided to stick around. Now, he would stick around, and in just a couple of years, by 1837, Chicago would find itself in need of a mayor, as we were incorporated into the city. And Mr. Ogden would Now, we are going to be floating down this Chicago River here. It's actually a pretty important river. You can imagine Chicago being nothing more than a swamp. Not really the ideal place to build a city of this size. Now, especially when you consider that this one swamp was surrounded endlessly by beautiful prairie. So why build your city on the one swamp on the prairie? Well, the answer to this somewhat puzzling question is this Chicago River. And the story goes all the way back to 1673, if you can imagine, back to 2 French explorers who went to map out the Mississippi. Their names were Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet. They went all the way down south, down the Mississippi. And on their way back up north, they had Native American guides that showed them on a shortcut. Now, see, if you took the Mississippi River into the Illinois River, then the Illinois to the Des Plaines River, you can then pick up your canoe, whatever boating vessel you're on that day, and carry it for about a mile. Reach this little 2-foot deep, 4-foot wide, sort of weed-choked stream. It just kind of trickled into Lake Michigan. And of course, this little stream is what we become this great Chicago River. Now it's about 20 to 25 feet deep, maybe as much as 200, 250 feet across this area here. Nothing that nature intended. We have had our way with the Chicago River, building it to suit our needs as we tend to do here as humans. But again, when the French came, nothing more than a small trickling stream, but they immediately saw the great potential of this Chicago River. And see, if you could just dig a canal near the south end of this river and connect it to that Des Plaines River, you'd have the key to a vast inland trade route, essentially connecting the East Coast in through the Great Lakes and going all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico, all via waterways. Now, this would not work out for the French. Now, it would work out for the United States, that newly formed state of Illinois in 1830. They finally proposed the building of that canal to be called the Illinois-Michigan Canal. And it was after proposing that canal that Chicago got its start. By 1833, being incorporated into a town. I mentioned 1837, incorporated into a city. By 1848, that Illinois-Michigan Canal was complete. And then just a couple years later, by 1850, Chicago had become one of the busiest port cities in the world. Now, off to our right, we do have Centennial Fountain, meant to commemorate 100 years since the founding of Chicago's Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That district was founded in 1889. Centennial Fountain, of course, completed in 1989, 100 years old. And there is that water spout out in front of Centennial Fountain. It actually shoots a giant arc of water across the river here. Goes off just about every hour, on the hour, for a solid 10 minutes. Essentially halting boat traffic for 10 minutes every hour. We plan pretty much all of our trips around that. And when the wind's blowing in the right direction, it'll shoot that water clear across the river and hit some unsuspecting pedestrians on the other side. But now off to the right, we have this Sheraton Hotel. And I like to mention the green tinted windows here. Now, because this is a post-modern building, and postmodernism is known for its contextualism, which is just a big fancy word meaning it pays tribute to its location. Now, the Sheraton Hotel is paying tribute to its location here on the Chicago River by those green-tinted windows. They're meant to reflect the natural green color of this Chicago River. And it is a natural green due to the algae kind of floats in here, gives it that greenish hue. Now it does get a brighter green every St. Patrick's Day. We do dye it a little bit brighter. But again, naturally this greenish color's here today. Now another really big idea in postmodernism is to look back on old schools of architecture and reinvent them with your newly found resources. No better example of that than this NBC tower straight off to our right, done by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1989. The NBC tower harkens back to the old Art Deco days, late 1920s. Art Deco was known for its soaring vertical lines. The NBC tower accomplishes by those darkened spandrels separating the windows there, giving a very machine-like. You might also notice about 2/3 the way up the building there, those upside-down L's with like big holes in the building. Those are known as flying buttresses, and they are paying tribute to the flying buttresses on the Chicago Tribune Tower, which is a near neighbor that we'll see here in just a moment. For now, we have this University of Chicago Bleacher Center, the building with the beautiful riverfront view. Now you'll notice as we float past the building that off to the side here, there are any windows to speak of. That's because this is home to the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business, and those are the students' classrooms. And the architect Dirk Wellman didn't think the students needed to be daydreaming out the windows of the classroom. So it is all business in the School of Business. But now we have this Chicago Tribune Tower here, and those flying buttresses at the top that the NBC Tower was paying tribute to in its design. Now, in 1922, Colonel Robert R. McCormick held a contest to see who could design the most beautiful office building in the world. The winners were Howells and Hood with this design, modeled after the Butter Tower of the Rouen Cathedral in France. They won $100,000 for their design, but surprisingly enough, the second place design in that Tribune Tower contest would actually have more influence on architecture here. Make sure you wave to the pedestrians on the bridges so they don't throw things. That's rule number 1 on the river. You wave and then duck. But now we have the Wrigley Building here, home to the Chewing Gum King. The Wrigley Building is actually 2 buildings connected on the 3rd as well as the 14th floor by a couple bridges. It is known for its beautifully white glazed terracotta tiles that glow in the night when they're all lit up. And also known for the clock tower at the top. It is modeled after the Giralda Tower in Seville, Spain. And then we have this recent addition to our skyline here. This is Trump's new building, Trump International Hotel and Tower. It's a pretty tall one. Now if you go all the way to the tip of the spire on the top of Trump's building, which architecturally speaking, spires do count in the height of a building. Now antennae do not. I'm not sure what the distinction is there. One of them is functional, one is decorational, but spires count. Now if you go all the way to the tip of that spire, it's 1,389 feet. Officially making Trump's building the second tallest building here in Chicago. Second only, of course, to the Sears Tower. Now, Trump's building has a few setbacks as you go up it. These setbacks are referencing the heights of the surrounding buildings. You have the first setback, the height of the Wrigley Building. The next setback's at the height of the Marina City Tower, a couple doors down. And the final setback's at the height of this IBM building standing right next door here. And this IBM building is the tallest and final of some 60 buildings the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe did here in the city of Chicago. Mies van der Rohe was known as the father of the modern school of architecture. He coined the phrase, less is more, or God is in the details. Very simplistic, inornate designs to his buildings. Most of this glass and steel box look is the general idea. The beauty was supposed to be in the simplicity of it all. Now, Mies van der Rohe taught at the Bauhaus in Germany until the 1930s when the Nazis came to power. Then he fled years to the United States and embraced us here in Chicago with his beautiful classes. Now, one of his students at that Bauhaus in Germany, Mr. Bertrand Goldberg, would listen to his teacher, but then go on to pretty much reject all of his ideas and build these 2 curvilinear structures right next door known as the Marina City Towers. Now, Bertrand Goldberg said he was revolting against the straight line, against man made in the image of a machine. He thought buildings should reflect shapes in nature. There are no straight lines or right angles in nature, only curves. So he designed very curvilinear buildings like these Marina City Towers here. Sometimes gets them the nickname of the corn-fed towers. They sort of but Marina City is also known as a city within a city. It helps you with restaurant in the center, and a theater in the back, which is now the House of Blues. And of course, a place to sleep on top. A paradise for shut-ins. But this is supposed to be the appeal from the building. also done in the 1960s, back when the middle class was running out to the suburbs. And every city needs a strong middle class tax base. So Bertrand Goldberg thought if you could provide all the modern amenities of a city within one building, like keep that strong middle class tax base here in the city of Chicago. We're now coming up to this low-lying red brick structure here. You might also notice some images of wheat adorning its facade. This is the old Reed Murdoch warehouse, and it is known as the Prairie School of Architecture. Now, the Prairie School was popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright. This building was actually done by George C. Nimitz in 1913. You might notice the building is asymmetrical. There is one more bay east of the clock tower than there is here west of the clock tower. There's
Ned, it's LaSalle.
Originally, the building was perfectly symmetrical, but by 1930, LaSalle Street Bridge in front of us here is being put in, and instead of going around the building, they decided to just fire it here. A new building coming up here. This was just an office building, around 50 stories tall. Goes by its address, 300 North LaSalle. But then the building next to it, labeled the Chicago School up front here, it's actually the Helene Curtis building. And it was formerly the old Chicks and Sanborn coffee warehouse, where they say you could still smell the ghosts of old coffee beans haunting the hallways. That's very spooky to say. Now, this does represent the Chicago School of Architecture, a tripartite or three-part design, base, shaft, and capital. Here you have the white stone base, the red brick shaft, and the all-glass penthouse at the top of the Capitol building. But now we're coming up to the largest building here in the city of Chicago, as well as the largest building in the world. When it was completed in 1931 by Graham Emerson Brooks and White, it has since been surpassed by the Pentagon. It still is the largest building here in Chicago, though. This is, of course, the Merchandise Mart. And by large, I don't mean tall, I just mean very, very large. Like it has 4.4 million square feet of usable floor space, stretched out over 25 stories. The Merchandise Mart takes up 2 city blocks. The post office thought the building was so big, they'd give it its own zip code. 60654 was just for the Merchandise Mart here. And it is done in the authentic Art Deco style. The NBC Tower was paying tribute to in its design. But you might have noticed these large heads, or the big busts standing out front here on those pedestals. I believe David Letterman once referred to them as the Pez Hall of Fame. Now they're actually paying tribute to the great merchant princes of the Chicagoland area, such as Montgomery Ward, Marshall Field, Philemon, Wanamaker, Wilbur, among others. Now the Merchandise Mart was done at a very unfortunate time. I mentioned 1931. The Great Depression was looming here in the United States. And originally that building was owned by Marshall Field himself. But by 1945, Marshall Field had to let go of his Merchandise Mart due to owing the government a lot of money in Allentown cities after that Great Depression hit. And he would sell it to a man who had a little bit of money, Mr. Joseph P. Kennedy, a famous political family, would buy the Merchandise Mart for around $13 million for around half its resale value at the time. Use it as a furniture showroom, which it still basically gets used for today. After that, by 1998, the Kennedy family would let go of the Merchandise Mart, selling it for somewhere around $600 million. But now we're here at a fairly historic point in the river, known as Wolf Point. It is the confluence, or the flowing together of all the branches of the river. We have the main branch that we just came down, the north branch a lot ahead of us here, and that south branch is going to be drifting off. I mentioned this point in the river because it is historic and our city sets. It goes right around here along the river banks where some of the first buildings popped up in the Chicagoland area. Is that one of those buildings, the Hotel Sauvignac, where a bunch of those original Chicago settlers gathered together and signed the charter to officially incorporate Chicago into a town. Now, if you look off in front of us, there is this bridge standing upright. If I don't mention it, I can ask the question, why is it standing upright? It's just an old railroad bridge. It's no longer used. So to keep it up like this, keep out of the way the boat traffic comes through. For now, here it is still fully functional, and they just keep it up like this out of convenience. It's a really popular spot for wedding photos. Don't know why. Off to the left, we have this pink structure standing here. That's the old Fulton House, an old cold storage warehouse done by Frank Abbott in 1908. Now, of course, being a cold storage warehouse, it did not have any of the windows or bathrooms that you see in it today. The building has been renovated by Harry Weiss and Associates. Renovations were complete in 1981, turning into these lovely condos here. Now, Harry Weiss said getting involved with the Fulton House was the biggest mistake of his career. I see he would have to wait an entire year just for the building to thaw out. And then not to mention punching all the deep holes in the building's facade, make all the windows and balconies you see in it today. If you look into those balconies, you can see just how thick those walls actually are. And all those walls were stuffed with horsehair. Now, tons of insulation in the early 1900s, probably smelling awful in the 1980s. But Harry Weese would go on to redeem his reputation, actually building these river cottages right next door here. You might notice a somewhat novel theme to the river cottages, some spiraling staircases, some circular porthole-like windows. I'd like to mention the very triangular theme to river cottages, a whole bunch of triangles coming out here. I mention it because it seems to me that Harry Weese was obsessed with the triangle. Now, most of his buildings managed to incorporate triangles into them somehow, or are triangles in themselves. And I'd like to say that he was geometrically obsessed. Now, see probably two more examples of this on River. For now, back off to the right, we have this East Bank Club. This was done in the 1970s and represents a very old school way of doing things here on the river. Notice it just sort of has its back turned towards us, not really paying any attention to the river, just sort of ignoring it at all costs. That wasn't until recently that put all the trees and flower pots out back here, now trying to embrace the river. Now, right across the way, you have the very new school way of doing things. This is the Kinsey Park development. You notice that these buildings are set off the riverfront to make for a nice riverfront walkway for pedestrians as well as canines to occasionally. Does anybody smell chocolate? Yep. Yeah. The boat actually runs on chocolate and the drinks smell chocolate. That's a lie. Blommer's Chocolate Factory is like 2 or 3 blocks away. When the wind blows in the right direction, you sense it. But the reason that people used to build like this East Bank Club did is because this Chicago River has been hopelessly polluted throughout the years. One of the most abused waterways in human history, actually. And it wasn't until recently we started cleaning up the river here. But the story goes all the way back to the 1850s, back when this big, bustling port city had a lot of barges and schooners running up and down the river here. They were dumping their oil, as well as who knows what else in the river. And Chicago was known as the meatpacking industry's capital to the world, and we were dumping those dead carcasses into Chicago. And if that wasn't bad enough, Chicago also had all of our city's sewer lines running right here into the Chicago River, so we were dumping all of our raw sewage into the river. Now, this wouldn't have been too big of a problem, except for the fact that the Chicago River once flowed into Lake Michigan, which was, and still is, our city's source of drinking water. Now, as you can imagine, poisoning your source of drinking water is not a very good idea. And there are a lot of outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, dysentery, other waterborne illnesses. That's when Chicagoans realized we needed to clean up our city's source of drinking water. Now, the obvious solution might have been to stop throwing stuff into the river. But that didn't occur to anybody at the time. Now, what they thought is if we just put water cribs about 2 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan, like getting our water there, being further out, it would be cleaner. I guess spring rains actually pushed the river water apart. Now, so that's when this Water Reclamation District came into the picture. I remember Centennial Fountain near the beginning of the tour, remembering that Water Reclamation District. They were founded in 1889, and mainly just to come up with the solution to this whole drinking water problem we had here. And they did come up with a pretty good idea. They thought, why not just reverse the entire flow of this Chicago River? I see that way we keep dumping all of our garbage and all of our sewage into the river here, and it would float south. You know, down the Des Plaines, down the Illinois, and down the Mississippi River, and St. Louis could deal with it. This is actually what we did. And in 1900, the Shipping Sanitary Canal was complete. Now, the basic idea is that you dredge up so much land from the south branch of the river that it's now lower than this north main branch, using Newton's great force of gravity to pull the river in the opposite direction. This was a huge land dredging effort, actually bigger than the DMP Canal. A whole lot of land dredged on the south branch of the river. But it was a big success. To this day, the river still flows the opposite direction, and our city's source of drinking water was saved. But surprisingly enough, the people of St. Louis were not too thrilled. Now, they actually filed a lawsuit against the city of Chicago. Now, maybe most surprising is that Chicago would go on to win that lawsuit, mainly due to a University of Illinois chemistry professor who said that when the sun came out and was shining down on these waters, it would oxidize all the pollutants, essentially cleaning the water on its way to St. Louis. This isn't really true, but the judge won. That was nothing. I'm sorry if any of you are from St. Louis. Of course. And we have been, we have been cleaning up the river here nowadays. It was just like 10, 15 years ago, the Environmental Protection Agency officially upgraded the status of our river. It was upgraded from toxic to just hazardously polluted. So, moving in the right direction. Now, with the upgrade, you can go kayaking on the river. It is approved for that recreational use. And you can also go fishing. Believe it or not, the wildlife has returned. Plenty of fish in the river now. They still don't recommend eating any of the fish. I believe the limit is 1 Chicago River fish per lifetime. But now we have a lot of railways in this area here. Overhead, we get the elevated train that runs by every now and then. It is called the L, even though only a third of it is actually elevated. Even when it goes underground, still call it the L. And it is quite as nice. Then off to the right, we have train tracks at the ground level. These train tracks run all the way down the south branch of the river here. And see, a long time ago, Chicagoans decided to set aside all this land for the railways, knowing that the east and the west were not connected. So people coming from the east or the west would have to stop here in Chicago and switch trains. And then when they stop, they'd spend a little bit of money on food or spend the night at a hotel. Just really meant to bolster our economy. Here's the other. This is a really valuable land. They wanted to use it for something more than just the railways. So they came up with this great idea known as air rights. The basic idea is that you could buy as much air above the railways as your heart desired. And you would put your building in that air by putting down a bunch of columns alongside the railways so as not to interrupt their flow, but then setting your building on top of those columns, sort of like stilts. The first example of this whole air rights concept is going to be this Boeing World Headquarters kind of off the right, built by Perkins and Will in 1990. It was originally the Morton Salt Building, but again now owned by me. And there is this taller tower here, flanked by a short one off to the side. There's a really good reason for that. Now, underneath the taller tower, the train tracks run perfectly straight. Plenty of room to put down your columns, set your building on top of the columns. But under the shorter tower, there's what's known as a switching station. A bunch of train tracks coming together, converging on one spot. No room to put down any columns beneath. So how do you support this smaller structure if not from below? Well, you hang it from above. There's a system of cantilevered steel trusses on the top of the smaller tower, actually hanging it. The same idea as a diving board on a much larger scale, of course. I'd like to mention that all those columns along the ground level of that smaller tower serve no load-bearing function whatsoever. The architects put them there merely to ease pedestrians' movements. Now, you do get a great view of those steel trusses now. Take a quick glance back. For those of you near the back of the boat, you just get a great view of everything. But straight off to the right, we have Riverside Plaza, the very first building ever done on air rights here in Chicago. It was done by Hulliford and Root in 1929. It was originally the old Daily News building, back when the great American poet Carl Sandburg used to write for us here in the city of Chicago. But again, a very unfortunate time. The Great Depression was the original plans actually called for 2 giant sphinx heads, one on each side of the building. I guess King Tut's tomb was discovered in the 20s, so everyone's going through this big Egyptian craze. Of course, the Great Depression would hit, Hulliford and Root's budget would be cut. The first thing to go on their budget, 2 giant sphinx heads. Now, if you look underneath this building here, you get a really good idea of this whole air rights concept. You see a couple of metro trains running underneath here. You see all those columns reaching back to support the building. The building above is known as Gateway 1. And if you really like Gateway 1, you're going to be pretty excited about Gateway 2. Because they look exactly the same. Now, they're known as twin buildings, so they're meant to commemorate 2 twin buildings set here in Chicago, known as the Butler Brother warehouses. Gateway 1 and 2 are both done by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, the first in 1965, the second in 1968. Both in this very modern school of architecture, popularized by Mies van der Rohe, sometimes called the Miesian architecture, using Mies van der Rohe's name as an adjective. It's just the glass and steel box look, really. You know, less is more. Well, by 1972, people started saying that less is more. They were getting tired of this whole glass and steel box look. So Skidmore, Owings & Merrill decided they would do Gateway 3 as a revolutionary new building. Yes, Gateway 3 would be a glass and stone box. It doesn't really break out of that modern school of architecture. But it doesn't fit in either, because the stone cladding is decoration. And modernism is all about streamlining all the ornamentation. So this makes up its own school of architecture called the International School. That's called that because you can pick the building up, put it down in any city in the world, and it would fit right in. It doesn't pay tribute to its location or anything really. Now off to the side here, a little bit behind Gateway 3 is Union Station, home to our Amtrak and Metro rails, running out to our cities, suburbs, as well as many other exotic locations, I'm sure. we're stuck behind the First Lady, which moves at a snail's pace. So, give you a quick story about how Chicago got its name. Chicago. It actually comes from a Native American term, a Chickasaw or Chickagua, or something to that effect. Now, which loosely translates as land of the stinking swamps. Land of the smelling onions. There are a few translations, they all include stinking and smelling. Because this place did. It was a big swamp. There were these wild patches of onions that grew here. And as they rotted away into the swamp, they emitted a pretty foul odor. And it characterized this region for quite a period of time. It was later mispronounced as Chicago, and thus our name was born. Off to the right, we have this building with large X's on its frame. Originally the Mid-American Commodities Exchange. I believe it's now home to Fitness Formula Clubs and a corner bakery. Now, but I point out those X's because they are not decoration. Now, they're actually serving the load-bearing function of the logo. It's called external cross-bracing, and you save on a third of your steel when you construct in this manner because it makes for all wide-open floor space. There's no need for any